The air in the room was thick, almost palpable, and the silence that filled it tasted bitter. My name is Helen Miller, a 38-year-old lawyer, and today, in this dimly lit room with its antique wood paneling, I was about to confront the greatest betrayal of my life. The reading of my recently deceased father's will was a ritual that unleashed the veiled disdain of every family member. From the moment my father began to read, I became the target of gazes that mingled disapproval and doubt. To them, I was nothing more than an intruder, a usurper of the inheritance they considered exclusively theirs. Therefore, the estate of Mr. John Miller will be distributed among the rightful heirs. The words landed like a blow, triggering a wave of frustration that spread through my entire body. My brother, Charles, sat at the head of the table, his confident demeanor infuriating me. And my mother, Martha, seated directly beside him, offered a smile that was supposed to be encouraging, but felt more like a mask concealing her consuming ambition. They believed I was a black sheep, worthless, a daughter who had chosen a path they would never understand. I, the lawyer, in that moment, was merely a symbol of the family's shame. Looking at them, I realized that it wasn't the material inheritance that mattered to me, but the fight for a place that had always been denied to me. I had grown up hearing that Charles, as the firstborn, would be the only one worthy of receiving our inheritance, a mantra repeated at every family gathering. The disdain directed at me over the years had become a deeply ingrained echo. I recalled moments from the past, such as family gatherings where my academic achievements were underestimated. Saying she graduated law school is like giving a medal to an athlete who doesn't compete, they used to comment. But all of that now sounded like distant echoes in a universe increasingly far removed from their reality. As my father continued the reading, an idea began to take shape. Within each clause, I perceived a space for action. My knowledge of probate law, painstakingly acquired, could be my tonic. I could use that disdain as fuel, transform pain into strategy. This wasn't a mere battle over material possessions. It was a fight to claim what had always been rightfully mine, and above all, a fight to reclaim my dignity. I observed Charles and Martha with a burning sense of determination. They weren't just fighting for assets. They were trying to erase me from what should have been a family legacy. But there, in that moment, with the cold voice of the will echoing in the room, I realized the cards were far from all in their hands. They forgot that the true inheritance is control, I thought, and the words became a mantra in my mind, resonating strongly with each new clause read. As a lawyer, I knew this was the perfect opportunity to dismantle the oppressive structure they had always tried to impose on me. With each sentence my father uttered, I silently plotted, mapping the flaws I knew existed between the lines and possibilities my father left open. The disdain in their eyes was proof that they had underestimated my capacity to act. Charles was so immersed in his own arrogance, so sure that I counted for nothing, that he didn't realize how much I had changed. I was no longer the invisible sister. I had grown into a strong and determined woman, ready to claim not only her place but her power. When the will finally ended, and the words seemed to hang in the air like a pungent odor, a new plan began to unfold in my mind. A sense of calm washed over me, as if I were standing on the edge of a precipice, ready to leap toward a future I had envisioned for so long. It wasn't just a matter of money at stake. It was a fight to be seen and recognized as a force to be reckoned with. With the betrayal finally exposed, it was time for me to open the door to a new legacy, one that went beyond possessions, a legacy of autonomy, control, and justice, which I had always desired. And nothing would stop me. I grew up in a house where ambition simmered beneath the surface, like lava about to erupt. From the start, family dynamics were shaped by rigid hierarchies and distorted expectations. My brother, Charles, the firstborn, treated his position as if it were a throne, while I, relegated to the role of insignificant sister, learned to live with veiled disdain. The message was clear. He would have everything, and I should be content to live in the shadow of his success. I remember family gatherings where his spotlight moments were always a rehearsed spectacle. When he finished speaking, I would hear my parents' praises, words that rehearsed an adoration for his greatness. "Charles is so intelligent, so dedicated. He'll make us proud," they'd say, while I settled for a forced smile. Every compliment directed at him felt like a stab at my confidence. The disdain aimed at me was subtle, but piercing. "Helena, you don't need to worry. Your brother is taking care of everything." My mother's words carried an echo of disdain, disguised as a concern that was never genuine. That was the reality I grew up in, where my education and dreams were mere epiphenomena to be ignored. I decided, therefore, to change my destiny. I left home determined to forge my own path. I went to law school, not just for a diploma, but as a way to claim my place in this intricate story. Being a lawyer wasn't a mere whim. It was a strategic choice of a woman who refused to imagine a future where she wasn't respected. Every night of study was a step in the opposite direction of the exclusion I had lived. Throughout law school, my friends became my refuge. Understanding the importance of connections, I built a circle that valued not only success, but character and dedication. They were the foundation of my strength, a support system that made me realize that behind the word inheritance was not just material wealth, but a legacy of control and autonomy. And that's what I wanted, what I intended to achieve. However, the presence of Charles and Martha in my life remained like a ghost, always threatening my sense of accomplishment. Charles, in his arrogance, seemed to belittle my career choice, deeply believing that I was nothing more than a mere shadow in his brilliant life. One day, at a dinner party, he commented on a case I was handling. "I imagine, with a little luck, you'll make some good connections," he insisted. Indignation welled up inside me, but I decided not to react. What he didn't know was that I had a plan. As I prepared for what was to come, I realized that their disdain was also an advantage. Charles was so immersed in his own arrogance that he didn't realize how much I had changed. He never imagined that the insignificant sister could pose a threat. This propelled me to analyze my family from a new perspective. Their contempt was fueling me, making me more astute and strategic. The reading of the will approached like an announced confrontation. The days leading up to the event were filled with a mixture of anxiety and expectation. Studying the nuances of the will and its wording, I realized that every word carried significant weight. Through consultations with fellow lawyers and meticulous analysis, I began to understand that the document wasn't simply a line of control. It was a chess game in which every move I made needed to be effective. In the days leading up to the will reading, a true emotional hangover took hold of me. I remembered every whispered insult, every demonstrated disdain. And yet, I decided to move forward. The memories mingled with an unwavering determination. And the phrase, "They forgot that true inheritance is control," became my mantra. The family gathering where the will would be read became the epicenter of everything I had faced. I awaited it as a moment of revelation, not only for others, but also for myself. Everyone at the table would be drawn into a battle of legitimacy, and I was ready to prove my worth. On the day of the event, I couldn't help but feel nervous. The room was decorated with an air of formality. Fresh flowers adorned the table, and the scent of polished wood filled the air. As soon as the reading began, I realized it wasn't just a ritual. It was the climax of years of oppression and injustice. My father's words echoed, but I wasn't just listening to the reading. I was analyzing every reaction, every change of expression in Charles and Martha. Throughout the process, I sought their gaze, looking for the anxiety and surprise I expected to find. Upon hearing the mention of my name in the will, the cautious movement across the room seemed almost palpable. Charles's gaze became tense, and I could see the disbelief on his face. The euphoria I felt was indescribable. To witness their disdain transform into insecurity was the victory I had longed for. At the end of the reading, while the room was still in shock, a feeling of liberation washed over me. The reading wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. I knew my days of silence were over, and that soon, my journey to control my destiny would become a focus, a firm stance in the fight for the dignity I deserved. It was a fight for more than just possessions. It was about rewriting the Oliveira family narrative, about breaking the chains of the past that had always held me captive. With the betrayal exposed and power in hand, I was prepared to transform my pain into power, and finally rise as the heiress I should always have been. As soon as the will reading concluded, the air in the room seemed to shift, as if we were submerged in a new reality. Silence hung heavy as Charles and Martha struggled to process what they had just heard. I, on the other hand, felt adrenaline coursing through my veins and a wave of conflicting emotions, relief, anger, and above all, a newfound determination. I knew that each of them was about to face the consequences of their actions over all those years. This wasn't just the beginning of a new chapter. It was the opening of a new book in my life. My heart pounding, I immediately looked for any loophole that could allow me to use the situation to my advantage. I needed to know more about the will, about how the clauses were structured. While they were recovering from the initial shock, my mind was already racing, raising questions about what had happened in terms of inheritance before the reading and what could be done about it. Afterward, I left the room, claiming I needed time to process everything. I went to my office, the echo of the will's words still ringing in my ears. My first task would be to understand the depth of those clauses and how they could be challenged. The chances of Charles and Martha trying to diminish my share of the inheritance were high, and I couldn't let them underestimate my ability to act. The first person I contacted was Lucas, my lawyer colleague, who had become a true ally in this fight. Not only because of the friendship we developed, but because of his expertise in family law and probate. "We need to analyze these documents in detail," I said, with a mix of anxiety and determination. As soon as we met, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. "You need to make sure each clause is correctly worded," he warned me. "Wills can contain errors that can be challenged. Sometimes small flaws can pave the way for major reversals." As he spoke, I observed his expressions. The assurance in his eyes brought a certain comfort. I knew that, in addition to the power I already had, I would need to act cautiously and strategically. I started rummaging through my own law library, scouring books, articles, and precedents that could be useful. Every page I turned was a new hope that there was a crack in the system that could be exploited. What started as a feeling of despair gradually transformed into a complex web of possibilities, and I was determined to unravel them. That week, we spent hours analyzing the will. Lucas and I discussed each clause, each detail, and even potential errors. "Helen, do you notice something repeating here? The way some words were chosen? This could be your chance," he said during one of those moments of intense analysis. As we examined the document, I noticed an ambiguous phrase that could offer a way to challenge all the provisions that Charles and Martha assumed were guaranteed. "If I can prove it was a poorly considered decision," I thought aloud, as the idea began to form in my head. The will hadn't been signed under the conditions they believed existed, and Lucas encouraged me to investigate further the context of that signature. This meant I needed to access files and legal documents that no one else had considered. "If they're not careful, this could be the chink in their armor you need to start your inheritance challenge," said Lucas, a smile playing on his lips. It was as if a new light had been switched on. I could be not only the controlling heir, but the architect of my own destiny, which made everything even more exciting. One afternoon, while reviewing the information I had compiled, I realized I would need the help of someone more involved in the estate's administration. I also needed to consider the involvement of people who had always been present, but could now be crucial to my plan. I went to Clara, an old family friend who had worked as an administrative assistant at our father's company. Despite her initial reluctance, Clara was becoming an indispensable source of information. "You can't imagine the mess the company is in after your father's death," she said. "Charles is a ticking time bomb in that place." Her eyes gleamed as she spoke, and I seized the opportunity. "Could you join me, Clara? What we know as the family legacy may not be the whole truth that Charles and Martha are trying to sell. We need to dismantle that," I implored, hoping she would share my enthusiasm. The idea of working collaboratively with someone who recognized the fragility of the situation reignited my determination. In an act of friendship and loyalty, Clara agreed, and our investigative team expanded. With Clara and Lucas by my side, the initial project quickly began to grow. Not only were we revisiting the will's documents, but we started compiling a list of potential errors, as well as an action plan to chart our course. Every legal flaw we exploited could become an opportunity to turn the game in my favor. After exhausting days of revisions and intense discussions, thankfully, something caught my eye in one of the registered documents. An obscured clause, a formatting error that made that item of the will collectively invalid. This meant something was about to crumble. Emotions surged through my body. This is bigger than I expected. This could be our first step toward control, I declared. As we took a break from our intense investigation, I could feel the tide turning. Finally, I had in my hands the possibility of challenging Charles and Martha's inheritance, not just with words, but with well-formulated strategies. The battle was only beginning, and the determination that burned within me now manifested itself in action. I was ready to take the reins of my life and make my legacy count. The days that followed the reading of the will became an emotional roller coaster. Armed with the determination that burned like a bright flame within me, I enthusiastically dove into the investigation, with Clara and Lucas by my side. The truth we were seeking wasn't just a matter of inheritance, but a fight for control of the Oliveira family legacy. I felt I could finally shape my destiny instead of being a spectator in my own life. My father's company boardroom transformed into a battlefield. Experts, interns, and familiar faces from the past became pieces of an intricate puzzle we needed to solve. We spread documents, wills, and bank statements across the table. Each paper was a clue that would help us uncover the truth. Clara, with her sharp eye, helped guide me through this labyrinth of information, while Lucas brought his experience in legal arenas. One morning, while going through a new batch of documents, I noticed something out of place. A seemingly insignificant detail, a number that didn't fit the financial transactions, a payment to a supplier that didn't match our understanding of how the company operated. Maybe we should delve deeper into this, I commented, pointing to the unsettling discrepancy. This could lead us to something bigger. The excitement in Clara and Lucas's eyes brought a new rhythm to our work. Over the following days, we dedicated ourselves to exploring every transaction in the company, accounts my father had left behind. We spent hours reviewing each document, each deposit, and each withdrawal. The emotional pressure was intense, but the possibility of challenging Charles and Martha's actions kept my adrenaline pumping. Soon we found a series of payments that indicated a complex web of transactions made before my father's death. With each document we reviewed, it became clear that Charles was hiding something, perhaps even manipulating the records to increase his control over the company. "Look at this," Lucas said, pointing to a series of transfers diverted to an external account. "This doesn't make sense. Why would your father make a transaction like this?" The question hung in the air. I waited for Lucas to examine the records carefully, hoping for a new revelation. And to my surprise, he found it. A marginal note that seemed like an obscure reference to a project my father was considering, something that could change the dynamics of the family and the company. "If your father truly intended to change the company's control and share power between you, this could be our trump card," Lucas said, his voice resonating with excitement. Clara, anxious beside me, quickly started taking notes. This could be the opportunity we needed to come to the surface. The weight of responsibility, the emotional pressure we carried, turned into electric energy within us. Together with Clara and Lucas, we decided to seek more extensive information from the company, not just the obvious papers. Beyond that, I knew we needed more allies, that is, people who knew my father's vision and could corroborate our findings. Then, I remembered Dr. Almeida, my father's friend. Alongside him, I had the confidence that the changes he desired could be supported by someone he greatly respected. Convinced of Dr. Almeida's importance in our journey, I arranged a meeting. I continued to feel his influence on the people who were there, and the warmth of that connection would become crucial in this mission. When I met him, I addressed the matter with emotional frankness. "Dr. Almeida, I need your help. We've found indications that my father had different plans for the company's future, and therefore, I want to discuss this with you." He nodded gravely upon hearing my words, and I could see the concern in his eyes as he settled into his chair. "Helen, your father's intentions were always geared towards a sustainable and inclusive future. There was a genuine desire for both you and Charles to be part of the leadership," he revealed, picking up some documents he had on his desk. His words were a breath of life into my strategy. I needed him to join the fight by my side. In the following days, armed with Dr. Almeida's support and the emerging revelations, our search for the truth resonated like an echo within us. Clara, Lucas, and I met every night, reviewing the points discussed with Dr. Almeida, preparing increasingly solid arguments to challenge Charles's possession of the family legacy. As our investigation deepened, a pattern in his actions began to emerge. Every measure Charles took was related to a power strategy, aimed at silencing not only my rights, but also the voices that represented the integrity of our inheritance. The moments when we were reviewing the documents and discussing tactics became the most intense and electrifying. Sometimes we were consumed by long hours of boredom, but mostly we had created an energy of camaraderie that had transformed into something more. There was a growing feeling among us. I wasn't just fighting for a legacy, but fighting a familiar monster with those who had become my allies. Even fatigue became fuel, fueling the passion of each of us. One night, while reviewing the documents, an idea began to form in my mind. What if, instead of just challenging, we started shaping the conversation in favor of a new future? We need a formal council that counteracts the idea that Charles is the sole heir. What my father really wanted was for us to know that this was a construction between the parties. If we can gather evidence of this, testimonies, documents, and the letter of intent, and build a narrative that underlines the true intention of the will, we can expose the truth, I suggested, the enthusiasm of a new approach exacerbating my resilience. Clara's eyes lit up as she listened to my plan, while Lucas nodded approvingly. "That's brilliant. We can put together a formal presentation that shows our conclusions and create a strong testimony," he said. The plan was taking shape, and for the first time, I felt a tangible sense of control. For several weeks, we focused our efforts on this new objective. With each meeting, each deposition, we fueled a narrative that not only challenged the inheritance, but also revealed Charles and Martha as the true opponents of my father's vision for the family. The game was changing, and I was no longer observing, but commanding the table. What Charles considered an easy step to maintain power and control became the seed of his own chaos. The eve of the big day of our presentation arrived. This symbolized not only a dispute over assets, but a fight for dignity in the presence of those who mattered most. I was about to reclaim the Oliveira family history, and I felt ready to rise and shine. The big day finally arrived, and the atmosphere in the meeting room was thick with anticipation. This wasn't just a matter of inheritance. It was a fight for justice and the control I had always desired. The morning sun struggled to penetrate the large windows, but the room remained enveloped in an atmosphere of tension. Clara and Lucas were by my side, their nervousness mingling with my determination. As I entered the room, I realized I finally had control of the narrative that had always been imposed on me. Charles, with his arrogant expression, sat at the table, a comfortable air of leadership in his posture. He believed he had everything under control, oblivious to the strength I had cultivated over all those years. "Good morning, everyone," I began, with a firm tone that resonated throughout the room. Eyes turned to me, and in that moment, the voices of disdain and indifference dissipated. Today is a decisive day. We are not here simply to discuss how my father's inheritance will be divided, but to understand the true intention behind what he left behind. The room was filled with people, lawyers, faces that were both familiar and strange to me. They were part of this family drama, but I was determined to transform this situation into a new story, a story that would honor my father and his true vision for the family. Charles gave me an arrogant look, but I seemed unfazed. "Don't forget, Helen, that I'm here to protect our family's legacy." His voice was overbearing and arrogant, as it always had been, but it no longer fazed me. "Yes, Charles, But let's talk about the legacy and the intention behind it. My father didn't want the pieces separated. What you consider a step to maintain control may very well turn out to be the seed of your own chaos, as you yourself said. My response provoked a subtle murmur among the lawyers present. The tension intensified, and I could feel the shift in the air. Dr. Martins, the family lawyer, who also seemed convinced of his defense of Charles, observed the exchange with interest. "Are you prepared to present concrete evidence of your claim, Helen?" he questioned, his tone implying disdain. "I am. First of all, I'd like to share a letter my father wrote a few months before he passed away. A letter that demonstrates the true intention behind the will." With a calculated gesture, I took out the letter and placed it on the table, as all eyes turned to the crucial document that could change the direction of the dispute. The room filled with murmurs as Dr. Martins examined the letter. The expression on his face was one of growing curiosity. "This letter is important, but we can discuss the validity of what is stated here. I must remind you that mere words do not create the inheritance. The will is what matters legally." His resistance was expected, but I felt like he was losing grains of confidence. It was then that Clara intervened, her fiery spirit radiating determination. "Dr. Martins, we can discuss the letter as a secondary item, but the most important thing is that it elucidated Juan Oliveira's intention to share the creation and administration of the estate. Inheritance is not just a sum of assets. It's a father's desire to want his children to rise together." The murmurs in the room became more intense, with some of those present nodding in agreement. That was the strength of our argument, the essence of the true family my father had always desired. The citation of the letter wasn't just a legal strategy. It was the emotional connection that resonated in all our memories. Charles, visibly uncomfortable, stretched out his arm, his confidence beginning to crumble. But outside voices can't change reality. My father trusted me to manage these assets. I've always been the only one by his side making decisions. His defense seemed more like an attempt to cling to what he had left. "No, Charles, I'm sorry. That's not the truth. The administration wasn't an isolated task, but a family construction. What we were doing since our childhood was the basis for being equals," Lucas said, entering the discussion to balance things out. The choice of these words was powerful, a mixture of bravery and precision. Dr. Almeida, observing the battle, decided to speak. "What you're seeing here, Charles, isn't just a fight over assets. It's a fight for the memory of your father and what he truly dreamed for you. João didn't want you to become a controller, but a leader alongside Helen." His words struck like a sword, and the atmosphere suddenly shifted, leaving Charles exposed. "If you refuse to see what he truly intended, it will be you who dishonor his memory," Dr. Almeida said, his voice deep and emotional. The impact of his statement was almost palpable, and I realized I had finally sown seeds of doubt in Charles's mind and in those around him. Whispers intensified in the room, and I could feel the tide turning in my favor. Charles tried to maintain control, but I perceived his hesitation as the evidence mounted in support of my claims. "Let's address all of this through administrative channels, then," Charles insisted, his words now lacking their usual force. "We can't make this decision based solely on a letter written by a father who may well have changed his mind." "But here's the thing, Charles," I replied, taking a step toward him. "If our father's true wishes were ignored, aren't we doing him a disservice? Your fight for control isn't a pact of love, but an act of selfishness. Why do you cling to this, knowing we have the right to be equally involved? How can we honor his legacy if what you propose is to maintain your vision of dominance?" The silence in the room was deafening as Charles tried to process my words. He no longer held all the cards. It was time to expose the narrative shift. The clash unfolding wasn't just between siblings, but between memories, aspirations, and the pursuit of a new future. Finally, it was my turn to conclude my presentation. "So, my proposal isn't merely a claim for what is rightfully mine, but a construction of a future where we can both work together. This is the true legacy we should honor." I looked at each member of the room, weaving my thoughts into the idea of a legacy, of a new path we would create together. The ripple of applause from a few audience members echoed beyond the room. The dispute wouldn't end there, but something had shifted in the chains binding us. I was no longer seeking acceptance. I was reclaiming what was mine, rewriting not only my destiny, but the family's future. Charles saw all of this. His countenance had changed, and the eyes that met mine now echoed a new understanding. For many, it would be a battle, but for me, it was about new possibilities. And as the meeting continued, I was determined to fight not only for the inheritance, but for the legacy my father truly wished for us both, a future of unity and mutual support. This was the true inheritance, and I would accept this responsibility with courage and dignity. The fight wouldn't end there, but I was finally armed with the truth, and now I was truly ready to be the true heir to the Miller legacy. The tension hanging in the air after my presentation was almost palpable. The verdict was still to come, but there was something different in the way the audience looked at me. The heat of the fight for truth had warmed hearts, and we, who were once merely pieces on a chessboard determined by Charles, now united under a single banner. With the session concluded, I already felt the consequences of that confrontation. Charles, who had always been confident in his control, was visibly shaken. Looking at the expressions of his lawyers, I realized the battle was far from over. It was merely beginning to take new forms. He wouldn't let himself be defeated easily, and I knew I needed to be ready for his next attack. With each step I took toward the exit, Clara and Lucas, who accompanied me, exchanged worried glances. "This is when they'll try to reverse things. We need to prepare," Clara said, her voice urgent. The stakes were high, and the next move needed to be precise. At the same time, an unwavering determination grew within me. I knew it was essential for me not only to continue fighting, but also to strengthen alliances. That night, as we reviewed our notes, we analyzed the strategies we could employ to stay ahead, something that hadn't been resolved with the presentation. The approaching moment was the most critical part. I remembered a friend of my father's, Mr. Alencar, an investor who had believed in his dream. He had an influential voice in the community, and if he could witness our commitment to the truth, he could encourage more people to support us. "Let's talk to Mr. Alencar," I suggested. "If he can corroborate my father's vision for the future, it could make all the difference." The next morning, I contacted Mr. Alencar. He agreed to talk, and as I arrived at the cafe where we were meeting, I felt a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Talking to someone who had been close to my father was important, and the prospect of him understanding the desire for a shared future filled me with hope. "Helen, how are you?" he asked upon seeing me, his sentimental face reflecting the concern we all shared. "I've heard about what's happening, and I'm here to help. Mr. Alencar, I need your help convincing others of the truth about what my father truly wanted. What do you know about the nuances of his inheritance?" I didn't hesitate to make my appeal. I believe that if you can offer testimony about his dreams for the future, it could change the course of this dispute. He nodded, thoughtful. John was a man who always wanted his family to remain united and prosper. We talked about this a lot. He believed in involving everyone in the management of his affairs. In fact, I remember when he told me he wanted not only to leave some money, but to provide the best for everyone. He paused, and I could see in his eyes the sincerity of his memories. That legacy should be shared, and you have every right to claim it. Mr. Alencar's words were a balm to my soul. It was exactly the kind of testimony we needed. As we talked, he offered to help gather other friends and associates who were willing to support our fight. I felt stronger with each passing moment, determined not to let Charles dominate the narrative. With Alencar's support, we began preparing a new meeting where other allies could share their memories and expectations regarding my father's vision. We spent hours developing a presentation that not only highlighted my father's letter, but also emphasized the importance of everyone who had been a part of his life and who could offer compelling testimony. I summoned everyone with a deep sense of urgency, and in the days that followed, several witnesses began to arrive, each more passionate than the last. Friends, Business partners and family members who remembered the principles my father championed were all willing to join this fight. I listened to them, absorbing their stories, noting how collective strength could shift the course of history. With each narrative we heard, a sense of solidarity grew, a renewed sense of purpose pulsing through the heart of the family. The event culminated in a new meeting to present the evidence and accounts to Dr. Martins, the legal team, and, most importantly, the supportive audience. The atmosphere at the new meeting was marked by a sense of transformation. When Alencar began to speak, his words resonated with everyone present. John always wished that you two, as children, would work together and not against each other. It's crucial that your father's intention not be distorted into a power struggle, but that it remain a spirit of collaboration. His words were powerful, and as others began to corroborate this testimony, the room seemed to light up with a new energy. It was as if my father's very essence was among us, in every memory shared. This wasn't just an effort to recover an inheritance. It was a fight for deeper recognition, a desire to honor what truly matters in the family. Charles began to make himself less present, his dominance threatened by stories he couldn't silence. I could see him squirming in his seat, trying to maintain composure as the truth spread throughout the room. He tried to respond, but his words echoed hollowly, as if lacking foundation. This fight was beginning to call into question everything he thought he could control. The true test of our efforts culminated in a new trial. Now, with the testimonies and my father's letter reverberating throughout the courtroom, I was eager to defend what I had fought for. As I gave my testimony, with every word that came out, every emotion that unfolded, I realized I was not only reclaiming my place, but bringing to light the right to a promise that seemed forgotten. Dr. Martins, now a cautious mediator, was clearly struggling to maintain control of the situation. However, it was clear that the narrative was slipping from his grasp. When my turn came, I took a deep breath and looked directly at Charles, who had composed himself, trying to maintain control. The inheritance shouldn't just be a number on a document, but the living memory of who we truly are and what we can become together. The words leaving my mouth were more than mere statements. They were oaths. They were silent promises that this fight wasn't just for a share of something material, but to restore the unity that should always exist between us. Tears also began to flow in the memories of others, and each account joined in a powerful montage. When we looked at the faces in the audience, I saw how divided my family had been, but now beginning to unite in a cry for truth. The support grew stronger, and Charles's resistance was increasingly exposed. As this presentation neared its end, I knew the verdict would soon come, but a new hope had sprung in my spirit. I knew that regardless of the outcome, I had already fought for something greater. In confronting Charles, I remembered my father's words. He didn't want this story written only on paper, but to become a legacy of love and unity. Tension hung in the air, but the spirit of victory was palpable. The fight for a new path for the Miller family was far from over, but truth and will were the foundation of the unity we were finally beginning to build. I was ready, more than ever, to be the true heir, to defend and cultivate the legacy we deserved. The minutes that followed seemed to drag on at an unbearable pace as we awaited the verdict. The room was charged with tense anticipation. Every face reflected the anxiety of an unknown future shrouded in hope. Looking at Charles, I could see his confidence fading with each passing second, overwhelmed by the weight of his own choices. The case that had once seemed secure was beginning to crumble under the discerning gaze of truth. Finally, the judge entered, and the courtroom quickly fell silent. He settled in and looked around with a grave expression. Having heard the arguments from both sides and reviewed the evidence presented, I have reached a conclusion. My heart pounded in my chest, and what felt like an eternity unfolded as he paused, as if the room were suspended in time. Mr. John Miller's inheritance should not be viewed as a mere accumulation of assets, but as a legacy that must be honored in its entirety. A whirlwind of emotions washed over me. It was the outcome we had hoped for, but the real battle was far from over. The judge continued, "I hereby decree that all heirs have the right to participate equally in the management of the inheritance and the estate left by John Miller." A murmur rippled through the courtroom, and I could see Charles, exhausted and furious at the same time. His expressions betrayed the frustration of someone who couldn't accept that control had slipped away. The audience was clearly moved by the judge's words, and the decision reflected the truth we had fought so hard to reveal. I could feel the support of those around me. Clara smiled, her eyes filled with tears of joy. Lucas stood beside me, his gaze strong and reassuring. What had begun as an individual battle had transformed into a collective movement in pursuit of what was right. The old rivalry was dissipating, and a new path was beginning to emerge among the family members. However, Charles wouldn't accept this outcome without a fight. He stood up, his face red with anger and disbelief. "This is preposterous. We can't allow the words of a man who is no longer here to affect the future I've built over years. He trusted me." His voice echoed through the room, but it lacked its former weight. "Charles, you must understand that love and unity have always been more important than any control structure you've tried to impose," I replied, my tone brimming with the confidence gained throughout the struggle. "This inheritance is a new opportunity to learn, grow, and respect our father's wishes. If we are unwilling to yield for ourselves, how can we honor his memory?" The courtroom fell silent again, and I knew that what I was saying was penetrating the minds and hearts of those present. The event wasn't just about the decisions we needed to make, but about the lessons we all needed to learn to move forward. Charles tried to argue, but his words sounded hollow and lifeless. The strength of my argument and the support of family friends who were ready to stand with me formed a powerful shield at my back. He couldn't maintain the narrative of control for much longer, and with each of them by my side, the truth slowly emerged as an unstoppable force. As the session concluded, the judge solidified the final decision. The inheritance would be managed jointly, with Charles and me as equals. Not only that, but the judge also indicated that there would be deadlines for when decisions would be needed, and how much effort would be made to ensure that my father's legacy remained intact. The judge emphasized that any act demonstrating dishonesty or manipulation could result in severe sanctions. I left the courtroom somewhat stunned, but also with a newfound sense of freedom. We had won the first battle, but I knew the real work was just beginning. As I exited the courthouse with Clara and Lucas by my side, the weight of a battle won, and a new path ahead became a tangible reality. "That was incredible, Helen. You really commanded the room. None of this would have been possible without your determination," said Lucas, his enthusiasm vibrating in every word. Clara agreed, her eyes shining. "We're just getting started." "Wow, what you did was amazing." The feeling of unity and satisfaction from that fight was beginning to lessen the bitterness that had accompanied me for so long. As we walked towards the exit stairs, a new world opened before me, a world where we could move beyond competition and embrace the true meaning of the legacy my father intended. At that moment, I looked at Clara and Lucas. Together, we will rebuild our legacy. This victory is not only for us, but also to honor our father. And we will do it in the way he wished. We'll work together and see what we can achieve from this. With new resolutions in mind and support I hadn't expected to find, I felt stronger and more determined than ever. The road ahead would be difficult and full of challenges, but now there was a renewed sense of hope. I had finally found my voice, and I was ready to use it fully. What had once seemed like an unequal fight had now become a collective effort, and I knew we were not alone. What was the inheritance that stood between Charles and me would not be a source of discord, but a symbol of a shared future, a quest for a new legacy that could truly honor the memory of our father and bring the Miller family into a new era of unity and growth. We were only beginning to discover what it meant to be true heirs, and with every step we took going forward, this new reality became increasingly promising. The true legacy was, in fact, control. The control to shape a future that belonged to us.